I'm Matt Nelson. I'm a partner at Warner Norcross and Judd, and we are honored to represent Isabella County in the United States Supreme Court in the case of Pung versus Isabella County. I will be arguing the case on February 25. This case is about what happens when you don't fulfill your civic responsibility and pay your property taxes and ignore numerous notices and continue to fail to pay your property taxes, so that at the end of the day, the county forecloses on your property and sells it to recover the property taxes that are owed. So the plaintiff here, the estate that used to own the property before it was foreclosed, that didn't pay the property taxes, after the sale of the property was entitled to receive back the difference between the taxes that were owed and the amount that was received from the auction. They weren't satisfied with that amount. They said instead that the county needs to pay to them the difference between what they claimed to be the fair market value of the property and the taxes that were owed, even if the county didn't obtain the fair market value through the auction. The net result of that would be that all of the people who do pay their property taxes would be subsidizing the individuals who didn't pay their property taxes by paying them more than the county actually received for the property at auction. Property taxes are the principal way that local government in Michigan funds the services that we all enjoy. So that includes everything from police and fire protection to schools to libraries to snow removal on the roads during the winter. All of those things are paid through property taxes, and 90% of the revenue that local governments in Michigan obtain is from property taxes. So ultimately, if property owners don't pay their property taxes, they still receive all of the services that property taxes pay for, but they're free riding on all the people who fulfill their civic responsibility and pay their property taxes on time. So that makes it essential for the county treasurer to collect all of the property taxes that are due and owing. So this is a very unusual factual situation. The property owner here died, and his probate estate retained the property for all of the years until it was foreclosed. In the normal course of owning a residential property, the owner files what's called a principal residence exemption affidavit. And that exempts the property from certain types of property taxes as long as it's the primary residence for the individual who files the affidavit. Well, after the homeowner died, no one filed a new affidavit. And so ultimately, the township treasurer, not the county treasurer, but the township treasurer, concluded that the exemption under for the personal residence didn't apply any longer because they didn't have an affidavit that was applicable to the estate or to the individuals who were living there. So as a result of the termination of the principal residence exemption, there was an unpaid tax bill of about $1,600. And those taxes were not paid. The personal representative of the estate, Mr. Pung, simply refused to pay them, said, I don't owe these taxes, and so I am not going to pay them. And he litigated that issue through court, which he was entitled to do, but ultimately at the end of the day, he didn't get a court to rule that those taxes were not properly assessed, but he still refused to pay the taxes. And as a result, the property went into delinquency on the tax rolls, was turned over to the county treasurer, and after 2 years, during which time there were numerous notices, including notices posted on the property itself, the property was foreclosed by the county treasurer. Mr. Pung would like the public to believe that he and his family are the victims here of cruel government action. And that's just simply not the case. He had numerous opportunities to file the principal residence exemption affidavit. He was told he needed to do so, and they simply didn't file one. And then after having litigated the issue to completion in the Michigan courts and not being able to overturn the tax assessment or the foreclosure itself, he simply refused to pay the tax debt, which had ballooned to $2,400 because of interest and penalties, but still well within his means to pay. He simply refused to pay it. And it's because of his obstinacy that ultimately the property was foreclosed. I understand that the Pung family has told the press and the public that they had no idea that the government would foreclose on the property over the unpaid taxes. That's simply not true. They received notices over a 2-year period warning that this would happen if that tax debt wasn't paid. They then stayed the foreclosure itself for a number of years while the issue was being litigated in the courts, so they had the opportunity at the end of that to pay the property taxes, knowing full well that if they didn't, the property would be foreclosed. So to hear that they're now claiming that they had no idea that the property would be foreclosed over their unpaid real estate taxes is simply not true. So Michigan law used to provide that once a property was sold after a tax foreclosure, that the county retained all of the proceeds and not just the unpaid taxes that were due and owing. The Michigan Supreme Court has since said, no, that violates the state constitution, and counties have to return any amount that's greater than the unpaid taxes to the former property owner. These are now what we call surplus proceeds. And those surplus proceeds here totaled more than $70,000, and they were repaid to Mr. Pung during the course of this litigation. Mr. Pung's position is that he's entitled to far more, that the county should have marketed the property, perhaps hiring a realtor and ensuring that they got the best possible price for the property, and then return to him the difference between the property taxes that were due and owing and fair market value. And that simply is not the law in the state of Michigan or anywhere else in the country, but that's the result that Mr. Pung is seeking here. After the property is foreclosed by the county treasurer is required by statute to offer the property at auction to the highest bidder. This is a process that has been used by governments to sell foreclosed properties for centuries. It's very similar to the process that's used by banks when they foreclose on properties for the non-payment of mortgage bills. And it's been a process that courts have approved in this country since the founding. Mr. Pung is taking a position that will upend centuries of law, because for centuries what the courts have said is that when a property is sold at auction, if it generates a sale price that's higher than the unpaid taxes, the previous owner gets the difference between the auction sale price and the taxes that are owed, the surplus proceeds. If the government has to pay fair market value, what the property might sell for if it was listed with a realtor for as long as necessary to get the price that was requested, the government is always going to be subject to litigation as to whether or not the price that was actually achieved for the property was sufficient. And also, the government is going to have the carrying costs of the unpaid property taxes for that additional period of time. And so they're going to have to finance the taxes that were not paid until the property actually sells. The net result of all of this is that if Mr. Pung's position prevails, governments will not actually be able to foreclose on properties anymore. And while that might sound like it's an attractive thing, the fact of the matter is what that will do is it will shift the burden of property taxes more and more to those individuals who actually pay the taxes, and provide less of an incentive for those individuals who are disinclined to pay their property taxes to do so, because it will make it easier for them to get away with freeloading on the people who are taking responsibility for funding their local government services. So the case comes to the Supreme Court after the county won on the fair market value issue in the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the intermediate federal appellate court, which sits in Cincinnati and covers the state of Michigan. We would like the U.S. Supreme Court to affirm the decision of the Sixth Circuit. We think the Sixth Circuit got it right, and that the court should conclude that the process that counties and other local governments have used to sell foreclosed properties for centuries should continue to be a valid way of enforcing property tax systems in the states.